People really hated tax collectors back in the day. It was a strong, burning kind of hate. You see this in the Bible a lot. When Jesus went to Zacchaeus' house, people were shocked. They grumbled. How could Jesus, a good teacher, hang out with someone like Zacchaeus? It just didn't make sense to them. But why? Why this deep hatred? It wasn't just that they took money. It was much, much more than that. It was about politics, about money, about religion, and about betrayal. It was about how the whole system worked and what it did to everyday people. Let's start with the big picture. Judea, where Jesus lived, was not its own free country. It was part of the Roman Empire. Rome was in charge, and Rome liked to make money from its territories. A lot of money. But Rome didn't send its own people out to collect taxes from every farmer, every merchant, every tiny village. That would be too much work, too complicated. So they came up with a system. It was a clever system for Rome, but it was awful for the people who had to pay. Here's how it went. Rome would sell the right to collect taxes in a certain region. These buyers were often rich, powerful people, sometimes Roman citizens, sometimes wealthy locals. They were called publicans. These publicans would pay Rome a big, upfront sum of money. They guaranteed Rome a certain amount of tax revenue from their region. Then, the publicans would hire other people to do the actual collecting on the ground. These were the tax collectors we read about in the Bible. People like Zacchaeus. They were the ones going door to door, standing at city gates or setting up booths along roadsides. And here's the key to why they were so hated. The publican had paid Rome a fixed amount. The tax collector working for the publican had to collect at least that much, plus enough to give the publican a profit. Anything extra the tax collector could squeeze out of the people was his own profit. I think about that for a moment. Like, there were no set tax rates that everyone knew. No official ledger you could check. No clear rules about what was owed. It was largely up to the tax collector. They had a quota to meet, sure, but beyond that, it was a free-for-all. This system was just asking for trouble. It was designed for corruption, and corruption is exactly what happened. A tax collector could demand more than what was fair. He could say, you owe this much for your crops, and this much for your animals, and this much for using the road. And if you argued, what could you do? He had the backing of the Roman government. He had soldiers, or at least the threat of soldiers, behind him. If you didn't pay, he could seize your property. He could take your tools. He could take your animals. He could even take your family as collateral until the debt was paid. There was no real court of appeal for the common person. No one to complain to. The system was rigged. So people were constantly being overcharged. They were squeezed for every penny. Imagine working hard all year, planting your fields, tending your sheep, making your pottery. And then a man comes along and takes a huge chunk of it, often more than he should. It stripped people of their dignity. It took their livelihood. It pushed families into poverty. Many people lost their land because they couldn't pay the taxes. They lost their homes. They had to sell themselves or their children into debt slavery just to survive. The tax collectors, through this system, were directly responsible for a lot of suffering. But the hatred went deeper than just the money. It was also about national pride and religion. The Jewish people saw themselves as God's chosen people. They believed God had given them their land or telling them what to do to take their money. Paying taxes to Rome was seen as a constant reminder of their subjugation. It was a humiliation. Every coin with Caesar's face on it, every tax payment, was a symbol of their lost freedom. It was like paying tribute to a foreign god. And the tax collectors, they were Jewish people, just like everyone else. But they worked for the Romans. They were collaborators. They were seen as traitors to their own people. They were helping the enemy. They were getting rich off the oppression of their neighbors, their friends, their family members. This was a huge betrayal. It was like someone from your own town going to work for the army that had conquered your town and then helping that army strip everyone else of their belongings. It was a personal sting. Then there was the religious aspect. Jewish law had very strict rules about purity and cleanliness. Contact with Gentiles, non-Jews, like the Romans, that could make you ritually unclean. And tax collectors had constant dealings with Roman officials and soldiers. They handled Roman coins, which often had images of the emperor, seen by many as idolatry. Because of this, tax collectors were often considered ritually impure. They couldn't fully participate in temple worship or synagogue life. They were often excommunicated or at least shunned by their communities. They were basically cut off from their religious life, which was the core of their identity. Beyond purity, there was the simple fact that they were cheating people. Jewish law was very clear about honesty, about not taking advantage of the poor, about fair dealing. The tax collectors broke these laws constantly. They lied. They stole under the guise of the law. This made them sinners in the eyes of the religious leaders and the common people. So, when you put it all together, a tax collector was one, a collaborator with the enemy. Is it any wonder they were despised? They were at the very bottom of the social ladder, grouped with prostitutes and notorious sinners. They were the absolute worst kind of people you could imagine in that society. And this brings us to Zacchaeus. We meet Zacchaeus in the book of Luke, chapter 19. It says, Jesus entered Jericho and was passing through. Jericho was an important city. It was rich, too. It was on a major trade route, which meant lots of goods coming and going. And where there's trade, there are taxes. The Bible tells us Zacchaeus was a chief tax collector and was rich. This is important. Not just a tax collector, but a chief tax collector. That means he wasn't just the guy sitting in a booth. He was probably in charge of other tax collectors. He oversaw a whole district. He likely bought the rights from the publican and then hired his own men. This also means he was likely even more despised because he was higher up the chain, responsible for even more exploitation. And he was rich. Very rich. That wealth came directly from the pockets of the people of Jericho. It came from overcharging them, from taking advantage of them. His big house, his fine clothes, his comfortable life, all of it was a testament to his corruption and the suffering he inflicted. So, when Jesus came to Jericho, Zacchaeus wanted to see him. We don't know exactly why. Maybe he was curious. Maybe he had heard about Jesus' teachings. Maybe deep down, despite all his wealth, he felt a void, a sense of guilt, or just plain loneliness from being an outcast. But there was a problem. Zacchaeus was short, and there was a big crowd trying to see Jesus. Everyone wanted a glimpse. So, Zacchaeus couldn't see over their heads. What did he do? He ran ahead and climbed a sycamore fig tree. Imagine that. A rich, powerful chief tax collector, a man of standing even if that standing was negative, running and climbing a tree like a little boy. It shows a real desperation to see Jesus. He must have looked a bit ridiculous up there, a grown man in a tree. And then, something extraordinary happened. As Jesus passed by, he looked up at the tree. He saw Zacchaeus, and he called out to him by name. Zacchaeus, hurry and come down, for I must stay at your house today. This moment would have shocked everyone. Absolutely everyone. The crowd would have gasped. The disciples would have been confused. The religious leaders, who likely hated Zacchaeus more than anyone, would have been furious. Why? Because Jesus, a respected teacher, a prophet, a man claiming to be from God, was inviting himself to the home of a chief tax collector, a notorious sinner, a public enemy, a traitor, someone who was ritually unclean. For Jesus to enter Zacchaeus' house meant he would become ritually unclean himself. It meant he was associating with the lowest of the low. It was scandalous. The people grumbled. He has gone to be the guest of a sinner, they muttered. They saw it as a terrible choice, a stain on Jesus' reputation. But Jesus didn't care about their grumbling. He saw something in Zacchaeus that others didn't. Or perhaps he saw the potential for something. Zacchaeus, probably stunned, quickly came down. And he welcomed Jesus joyfully into his house. We don't know what happened inside the house during their conversation. The Bible doesn't tell us. But something profound clearly took place. Because after that time with Jesus, Zacchaeus stood up and made an incredible declaration. Look, Lord, here and now I give half of my possessions to the poor, and if I have cheated anybody out of anything, I will pay back 4 times the amount. This was a radical transformation. This wasn't just a small change. This was a complete U-turn for a man who had built his life on greed and exploitation. Let's break down what Zacchaeus promised. First, I give half of my possessions to the poor. This is huge. For a rich man, giving away half of his wealth is an enormous sacrifice. It shows a complete shift in his values. He was known for taking from the poor. Now he was giving to the poor. Second, if I have cheated anybody out of anything, I will pay back 4 times the amount. This part is even more significant. Under Jewish law, if you stole something and confessed, you generally had to pay back the stolen amount plus 20%. If you were caught stealing and it was proven against you, you had to pay back double. But Zacchaeus wasn't just offering to pay double, he was offering to pay 4 times the amount. This was the penalty for stealing a sheep and slaughtering or selling it, showing a very high level of restitution. It was a level of repentance that went far beyond what was legally required. It showed genuine remorse. It showed he understood the depth of his past wrongs and wanted to make them right. Think about the impact this would have had in Jericho. People who had been wronged by Zacchaeus, people he had cheated out of their livelihood, would now get their money back and then some. It would be an act of justice, a restoration for many in the community. This was not a show for Jesus. This was a sincere act of a changed heart, and Jesus recognized it immediately. Jesus said to him, "Today salvation has come to this house, because this man too is a son of Abraham. For the Son of Man came to seek and to save the lost." Salvation has come to this house. This wasn't just about Zacchaeus' individual soul. It was about his entire life, his relationships, his standing in the community, and his relationship with God. He was restored, he was brought back into the fold, and Jesus' final words summarize his whole mission. For the Son of Man came to seek and to save the lost. Zacchaeus, the despised tax collector, was exactly who Jesus came for. He was lost. He was an outcast. He was reviled. And Jesus offered him a way back. The story of Zacchaeus perfectly illustrates why tax collectors were so despised, and also why Jesus' message was so revolutionary. They were despised because they were agents of oppression. They were the visible face of the Roman occupation, demanding tribute from a people who believed they should be free. They collected taxes that funded the very empire that held them captive. They were despised because they were corrupt. The system allowed them to enrich themselves at the expense of the poor and vulnerable. There was no accountability. They could demand whatever they wanted, and people had no choice but to pay. This led to widespread poverty and hardship. They were despised because they were traitors. They were Jewish, but they sided with the enemy. They made money by exploiting their own people. This was a deep personal and national betrayal. They were despised because they were ritually unclean. Their constant dealings with Gentiles and Roman coins made them outsiders in a society that valued religious purity above almost everything else. They were cut off from the religious life of their community. They were despised because they were blatant sinners. Their actions went against the clear teachings of Jewish law about honesty, justice, and caring for the poor. They were seen as living in open defiance of God's commands. So when the Bible groups tax collectors with sinners and prostitutes, it's not just a casual insult. It reflects the very real social and religious standing these people held. They were considered beyond redemption by most. But Jesus saw things differently. He consistently challenged these social norms. He ate with tax collectors like Levi, also known as Matthew, one of his disciples. He welcomed them, he offered them forgiveness and a new path. This was a major point of contention between Jesus and the religious leaders of his day. They couldn't understand why he would spend time with such people. They believed that to be righteous, you had to keep your distance from sinners. But Jesus taught that the sick need a doctor, not the healthy. He sought out those who were furthest from God, those who were most lost. Zacchaeus' story is powerful because it shows that even the most despised, even those who seem irredeemable, can find redemption. His repentance wasn't just words, it was action. It was concrete. It involved giving back, making amends, and completely changing his way of life. It's a reminder that true change comes from the heart. It's not just about outward appearances or what others think of you. It's about recognizing your wrongs and actively striving to make them right. The hatred for tax collectors was understandable, given the context. It was born of oppression, economic hardship, religious offense, and national betrayal. But Jesus' response to Zacchaeus and to other tax collectors offered a different path. It offered grace, forgiveness, and the possibility of a new beginning, even for those most reviled. It showed that no one is beyond God's reach or too far gone to be saved, and for Zacchaeus, that meant not just spiritual salvation, but also a restoration of his standing, even if only slowly, in the community he had so deeply wronged. It was a message of hope, even for the hated.